Chapter 5. Tim and I were riding our bikes around town, but it started raining, so we hung out downtown for a while. I went into the Island bookstore and Tim went into the toy store. We both went into a couple of fudge shops, and I bought a big chunk of fudge called Moose Tracks. Yum! Finally, the rain stopped and we got on our bikes again. We rode by the marina and passed the big white fort on the hill. The governor of Michigan even has a summer home on Mackinac Island, and we rode past it too. There are a lot of people walking on the path, but the farther we got out of town, the less people there were. Soon, we didn't see anyone anymore. By this time, we had pretty much forgotten all about the old man in the tree in the quicksand. So when I was riding past the spot where we had spotted the old man last year, I couldn't believe my eyes.
Tim, look!
I shouted. Tim was in front of me riding his blue bike. He stopped and turned to see where I was pointing. It was the same strange old man with the funny hat. He was sitting in the same old tree in the same place where he had been last year. Same long gray hair and beard, same weird looking pointy hat with gold and silver stars. He wasn't more than 50 feet away from us.
Hey!
Tim shouted. Sometimes when Tim says hey, what he really means is hello. I was sure the old man was going to run away just like he did last year, but he didn't. In fact, the old man did just the opposite. He waved at us, urging us to come closer.
Come on.
Tim said, hopping off his bike.
No, Tim.
I said.
Let's stay here.
But actually, I wanted to go see for myself, too.
Oh, come on, Munchkin.
He whined.
You remember what happened last year?
I reminded him.
Don't worry, I'll watch out.
He replied, referring to the quicksand. I reluctantly followed him into the woods and looked up. To my surprise, the old man was still in the tree, smiling, still waving at us to come forward. I was walking slow, keeping a close watch on the ground. I sure didn't want to step in any quicksand. When we got close to the tree, we stopped. And guess what? The old man had disappeared again. So strange.
Where in the world did he go?
Tim asked, staring up into the branches. I looked up into the tree too, but I kept glancing down at the ground, expecting to see quicksand. I was relieved when I didn't see any.
This was just like last year.
I whispered.
He disappeared last year too.
Well, I'm going to find him.
Tim stated seriously.
People just don't disappear.
He walked toward the trunk of the huge dead tree and looked up.
What are you doing?
I asked him, but I already knew. Tim was going to climb the tree.
No, Tim.
I told him.
I don't think that's a good idea.
And it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't a good idea at all, as we were about to find out. Chapter 6. The trunk of the old tree was really, really big. It was black and wrinkled with age. Branches grew out from everywhere, going way up into the air. It looked bony and weird, like some old black skeleton. It was kind of spooky looking. Tim grabbed a low branch and pulled himself up into the tree. I still didn't think it was a good idea, but I didn't say anything more. Tim hardly ever listens to me anyway. If you have a brother, I'm sure you know what it's like sometimes.
Be careful,
Was all I said.
Quit telling me what to do.
He said sternly.
You're not Mom.
No, I'm not, but I'm older than you and you have to listen to me.
I do not. I'm bigger than you, Munchkin.
By 1 inch, and I'm not a munchkin. Quit calling me that.
Sometimes I just cannot stand Tim. I watched him pull himself up onto a branch, thinking to myself that if he fell, Mom was going to blame me for not keeping him out of that tree. Then not only would Tim be hurt, but it would be my fault. Sometimes it's hard being an older sister. I was watching Tim carefully, watching his every move as he reached for branches and pulled himself up through the tree. He's actually a very good tree climber. He can climb trees like a chimpanzee, but I couldn't help being a wee bit nervous. He looped his arm around a big fat branch and pulled himself higher still. He was already 20 feet off the ground. Just be careful, Tim, I thought. Just be careful. A motion out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. A branch had moved all by itself. I couldn't believe it. A branch started moving, curling in a long, skinny finger. Then another branch started to move. Then another. The tree had come alive.
Tim!
I yelled.
Look out!
But he was already too far up into the tree to hear me. I watched in horror as the branches slithered about, twisting and turning like black snakes in the sky above. It was the most bizarre thing I had ever seen. I wanted to run, but I think I was too afraid to, and I couldn't leave Tim. I didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, a long branch shot through the air, heading right for Tim. Chapter 7.
Watch out!
I screamed at the top of my lungs, but it was too late. Tim didn't even see the branch coming. It wrapped itself around him like one of those snakes I've seen on TV. You know the kind. Boa constrictors is what they're called. I've seen them on the Discovery Channel. They wrap themselves tightly around their prey and squish them. That's just what this branch looked like it was going to do. The branch wrapped itself around Tim, and then another branch did the same.
Help!
Tim screamed. The branch pulled him away from the tree and held him suspended in the air. Now, I was more than just scared. I was horrified. I was so horrified that I didn't even see the branch that sneaked up behind me. It grabbed me without warning, wrapping its wrinkled arm around my waist, holding me tight. I screamed and grabbed at the branch. I tried to pull it away, but it held fast. I tried to hit it with my fist, but that didn't help at all. Then it lifted me off the ground. I was pulled high into the air, higher until I was only a few feet from Tim. We were both struggling to get free. Problem was, if we did break away, we would fall 50 feet to the ground.
Let me go!
I screamed, trying to pry the branches from around my waist.
Let me go!
Mom and Dad are not going to like this, I thought. Mom and Dad are not going to like this one bit. Tim and I were both screaming and yelling, hoping someone would hear. We were both frantically trying to pull the wiry branches from around us. Suddenly, I heard voices. People. I was way up in the air and I could see everything. The lake, the bike path, the two people on their bicycles. They were riding on the thin black strip of blacktop that wound around the island.
Help!
Tim and I both screamed.
Help! Help us!
But it was as if the people couldn't hear us. They just kept riding along, taking their time on the bike path, talking to each other. In a few seconds, they disappeared from sight.
Tim, what are we going to do?
I screamed, but Tim couldn't hear me. He was too busy struggling to release himself from the clutches of the branches. Then we were moving. The branches began pulling us inward, toward the tree trunk. I kept struggling, trying to wrestle from the squeezing branches, but it was no use. We couldn't get away. The tree kept pulling us inward, closer, closer to the trunk. And suddenly, I realized what was going to happen, and it almost scared me to death. Chapter 8. The tree branches still held us tight, but now Tim and I were being pulled toward the huge hole that had opened up in the trunk. It was like some big, dark mouth. I could almost hear the tree licking its lips in bloodthirsty anticipation.
Sandy!
Tim screamed.
Help me! Help me, Sandy!
Tim rarely called me Sandy, but there was nothing I could do. I had my own problems. I was bound by wiry limbs that were wrapped tightly around my torso. If only Tim hadn't decided to chase after that funny little man. The mouth in the tree opened wider, and Tim was first.
No!
He screamed as he was forced into the hungry mouth of the tree.
Sandy, help me!
And then, in the blink of an eye, Tim was gone. He had been swallowed up by the tree. Now, I was really scared. I was scared because Tim had been devoured by a tree. But I was also scared because the tree branch that was carrying me was now pulling me toward the gaping mouth. I was going to be next. I tried kicking at the tree with my feet, but it didn't help. I was being pulled closer, closer, closer still. And then everything was black. The branch released its grip and I was free. But that didn't matter now. I had just been eaten. I had been gobbled up by the tree. It was dark and I could feel the hard wood of the tree all around me. Oh no, I thought. Oh no, this is it. This is it. Then I could hear Tim.
Sandy!
He was yelling.
Sandy, can you hear me?
Yes.
I shouted, but I still couldn't see him. He sounded very far away. I was being pulled further into the tree, but now the wood seemed to be getting softer and it wasn't crushing me. I struggled to see, to find a way out, but there was none. I was trapped for good. Then, all of a sudden, I bumped into something soft and I jumped up and screamed. It was Tim.
Sandy, is that you?
He said.
Of course it is me.
I said, I don't think I have ever been so happy to hear his voice. Then a very strange thing happened. As if being eaten by a tree isn't strange enough. I could feel myself being suspended in the air. It was like both Tim and I were weightless. It was dark and black and we couldn't see anything. I thought that this must be what it feels like to be an astronaut in space.
What's going on?
Tim asked, his voice shaking.
I don't know.
I replied. I tried to move and suddenly I realized that I could walk. The ground beneath my feet felt soft and squishy, like thick moss. I took a step forward and bumped into something hard.
Ouch.
I said. Tim held onto my hand and now we took a step in my direction. It was still darker than night and I couldn't see him. I've never been anywhere that was so dark. I ran my hands on the hard wall in front of me. It was rough like wood, so I thought we must somehow still be inside the tree.
Where are we?
Tim asked. Right, like I was going to be able to answer that question. I continued moving my hands along the wall. Suddenly, I felt something. It was like a crevice, a crack of some kind. I pushed my fingers into the split, trying to pull. I saw light. As I pulled the crack apart with my fingers, daylight started to shine through.
Tim, help! This might be the way out.
Tim drew closer to my side, and he placed his hands in the crack that was opening up.
Harder!
I told him. The space got wider, and more light came in.
We can do it.
I told him.
We just have to pull harder.
It was a struggle to speak because I was pulling so hard. Finally, we got it open far enough so that we could slip through. I wasted no time, and Tim didn't either. He held on to the belt loop of my jeans to make sure that I wasn't going to leave him. We both tumbled into the light and looked around in amazement. The world we had left was gone, and the world around us was nothing like I have ever seen before in my life.